in that combination of trying to avoid enormous duplication of work, maybe even with low quality, it's better to do all we can to bring the best people together and share the evidence, and then at our national level to be much more focused on being specific on how we transmit the results to the decision makers. And there is indeed a lot of duplication and redundancies in HTA, and we wanted to do something about that. And as I showed you yesterday, we need to know each other better, and during the European process we have indeed been brought together so that we know much more, like for example how HAS works, how NICE works, and how the Italian agencies work, and where we can collaborate. We also need to have the same language and templates in order to be able to share, and I'll come back to that. So we are in so-called joint actions, which just means that they are supported by the European Commission to be work between the Commission and the member states. And Croatia now participates as a full partner from the 1st of October this year. So that means that the government here nominated the Agency for Accreditation and Quality to be participant in full status with participants from other countries. Obviously from France it's HAS, from Germany it is EQUIC and DIMDI. EQUIC is, as François told you, the agency that was established some years back to inform the decisions in Germany. There is a so-called Federal Joint Commission that makes the decisions, and this Federal Joint Commission is one of the organizations that participate in UNETA without being a full government nominated member. So we also have the GBA of Germany participating in UNETA. From Italy, for example, it's IFA, the medicines agency, and it's AGENAS, the national agency for regional healthcare. In Slovenia, it's the National Public Health Institute and also the Medicines Agency of Slovenia, and so on and so on. So you could say that, for example, in UK, it's NICE. So we could say that we have on board in this group all the key players in Europe. And as I showed you yesterday, a majority of the member states in the EU have designated entities that are doing HTA. Eventually, after end of next year, we will have the legal basis for a permanent network for HTA in Europe, and we envision that our network will, so to speak, grow into that permanent network. It's been a long process, and in Europe things take time. Hopefully the time taken has made it possible to find the right solutions on the way. The joint action that we're currently finalizing by end of this year is focusing on the facilitation of efficient use of resources for HTA. It's necessary to have a sustainable system where we can share information and knowledge on HTA, and we also need to have a constant focus on promoting good practice in HTA, both in the methods and the processes. I'll skip this one. The joint action that we're entering in now in an overlap period of 3 months, we started 1st of October. The joint action 2 is incorporating all member states as full partners except Luxembourg, that is only on its way with establishing an entity for HTA. The budget is in the health program of the EU quite a big budget. It's nearly 10 million euros for a 3-year period. The focus in this phase is actually then to go on and strengthen the application of the tools and approaches that we have developed in our collaboration between the partners. It's also important in this phase to find an even better understanding on how a sustainable structure of work in HTA could be established. And then also how to find the procedures for the management of the future permanent network. This graph is showing a theoretical description of innovation from basic research to application. Much basic research obviously does not lead to innovations, but sometimes it does indeed through applied research, and we would tend to see gradual growth of the application of technology with a slow uptake, and then after some time maybe a higher speed of uptake of the technology. It's rather theoretical curve. Obviously, it's possible to influence that curve. The traditional field where HTA and relative effectiveness assessment, as we'll hear about later from François, the field where HTA is applied is very much from around the time that the technology actually is introduced into the system, and throughout the phase where it's finding its place in the system. But increasingly what we see is a focus on providing rapid relative effectiveness assessment, especially for drugs at the very time when the drug is getting its marketing authorization. So as you heard from François, the rapid relative effectiveness assessment is something that you cannot say no to as an agency, but increasingly France, HAS is also realizing that you also need to have broader approaches to say specific disease fields or areas or indications to balance the rapid relative effectiveness assessments that often are looking at a single intervention only. François also referred to additional data collection, and you'll hear more about that. We see an increased interest in getting additional data collection on real life effects of the technology after it has been introduced, especially in situations where there is a big uncertainty about the step from the research-based, maybe experimental results on the effect of the technology to the application in real patients and real life settings in the health system. And for that purpose, there is increasingly a need to have additional data collection. With the increased importance of HTA, there is, from the sponsors of technologies, the drug companies, the developers of devices, an increased interest in getting early scientific advice, that getting advice from the assessing bodies on what kind of results, or rather what kind of questions would they like to have answered with the research before the technology is introduced. So this could influence the phase 2 and phase 3 studies that the companies are doing. It's an interesting field, and it's really an interesting opening that those who do these assessments for the decision makers are invited to advise on the kind of research they would like to see as part of the input for their assessments. In the current joint action, we are developing work in so-called core HTA. I'll come back to that in a moment. François will tell you about relative effectiveness assessment and about the facilitation of evidence generation. Obviously, we need to have a strong information management system, so that is also one of the so-called work packages in our activity. And then we have also worked on strategy development. Yesterday I showed you some results on work we did on capacity building to do HTA in European countries. So obviously what we try to do with our collaboration is not just to work at the policy level, but indeed to try to be very, very practical and useful for those who are doing the HTA in the European HTA bodies. So what, in fact, can you now get as a researcher working for an HTA in one of the member states from UNETA? A graphic way of describing this is something that was provided into our network, a toolbar to put into the browser. This is an opening browser on my own computer, and the toolbar you see here, starting with UNETA, you click there and you get to the website of UNETA, but actually there are a number of other things on this toolbar, like you click directly into a number of UNETA tools that can be helpful for your work. There are also communication tools to collaborate and communicate with partners within the network. You can put your ongoing work into work areas where there's only access for those who are involved in that specific work. So it's posted somewhere in the database with access only for those involved during work in progress. A number of resources that you can address, and there is also a news feed that is collecting news from the members into one single news feed. I alluded yesterday to this planned and ongoing projects database, which is one of the things that we developed in UNETA, and it is, of course, with the objective to facilitate collaboration. You need to be able to identify your colleagues at the stage when they are planning or starting up HTA that you may also be starting up at the same time in your institution. And this statistics has been collected over 2-3 years now, and it now has more than 1,000 planned and ongoing projects in the database. And what you can do is that if you are asked to go into a field to do HTA, you can address this database and see who else are working either on a completely the same problem, the same question, or rather similar questions that perhaps could allow you to share work. This has already now led to several collaborations. I think even the Croatian agency has been involved in some collaboration based on the POP. One thing that we developed in UNETA as a new thing is the so-called HTA core model. The challenge of sharing information between HTAs is that the better the reports are in actually localizing the decision maker and sort of focusing its reporting to that specific decision maker, be it in UK, be it in France, in Germany, in Austria, or here, the better you succeed in that, the more difficult it is to take that specific report and use it in another setting, because it has particularly been focused on that setting. So it would take very carefully into consideration the health system that this information is going into, the epidemiology of the population, and maybe also the strength of the economic means available in the country. And that actually can make it quite difficult to take something from a relatively prosperous country like UK and take it directly into Croatia and use the reporting here. What you can do is that if you can get access, you can take the information from the systematic review of the literature and use that. And that is one of the bases for this HTA core model. So we're stepping back in the process of producing HTA to the level where we clarify the questions that HTA tends to ask. That is called ontology, both in philosophy but also in the science of informatics. We also need to have some ideas about the methodology, so methodological guidance goes with this. And then we need to have a structure for sharing the information, a reporting structure. We defined 9 domains of this HTA core model to ensure that the full model covers the broad scope of HTA. So it starts with clear things like health problem and current use of the technology, the description and technical characteristics of the technology and comparator technologies,